Welcome everyone to episode 62 of the Ski Podcast. Today we're going to be tackling, sadly, lockdown and whether ski resorts will open in December. I wonder how long we'll be going on with this conversation. We're going to get some snow reports though. There has been skiing in Andermatt and Tignes. Going to be chatting about the World Cup season coming up. Talking about ski touring and skiing in Scotland, which might be on people's cards for this winter. But firstly, I'd like to thank Switzerland Tourism, our sponsors, for continuing to partner us through this winter. And also, listener, and all our listeners, I'd just like to thank you because we've just passed 100,000 total listens since we first started doing the Ski Podcast. So thank you very much. And if this is your first one, there's 88 other episodes to catch up with during lockdown. Now, I've got two guests with me today. They are Ed Drake, who is presenter of the Ski Racing Podcast. And you may know him from ski racing because he competed for Great Britain in the Olympics and commentates on Eurosport. Hi, Ed. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem. And we've also got Katy Dartford, who is a freelance ski journalist who's based out in Lyons. How are you, Katy?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad.
Yeah, we'll come on to the lockdown chat shortly. But perhaps you could tell me, Ed, when was the last time you went skiing and where was it?
The last time I went skiing would have been in Bormio, and that was, I think it was around February half term, actually. I was commentating over at the English Championships and everything had just started kicking off with the dreaded corona. And,
and Bormio is one of the key locations for it.
Yeah, so we were there and it was sort of umming and ahhing whether we would travel to go, but then it wasn't in that region at the time when we were there. So we decided to go, and then I think a couple of weeks or a week or so after we left, it would, all inflamed, and that was it. And then multiple trips cancelled at the end of the year. It seems like a lifetime ago that I had some skis on. Yeah.
What about yourself, Katy? When were you last skiing?
Yeah, March the 8th. So literally the weekend before the whole lockdown in France came into play. I remember because it was International Women's Day, and me and just a friend of mine, girlfriend, we did a ski tour just above Sallanches called the Cap Tête. About 1,500 meters of climbing up, and yeah, it was really nice getting out the Chamonix, which is my normal kind of place to go skiing. Did not think, obviously, for 1 minute that was gonna be the end of it. I planned to go to Chamonix the next weekend and everything like that. So yeah.
But so ski touring, my understanding is ski touring did continue informally a little bit in France. I know perhaps people weren't meant to, but it was going on to start off with till the local authorities tried to sort of crack down on it.
Yeah, I think basically it just, if you wanted to go and do it, I think people would just look down on you so much because there were lots of stories, you're taking away, if you have an accident, you're taking away, like, a helicopter's got to come and get you or something. All the vital health services needed for other people. So it's just basically you're just made to feel like you're so selfish if you dare to go ski touring. And then I think, Chamonix, I'm talking from Chamonix because that's the point of view I have the best knowledge of. They were really cracking down, as you say.
Yeah, well, you're still in France now. And since the last podcast, today is the 6th of November. Since our last podcast, both the UK and France and Austria and many other countries around Europe, for that matter, have gone into lockdown. You are in Lyon at the moment. What I think your regulations are much more stringent than ours, particularly in relation to exercise. What's the situation there? Do you want to explain it?
Yeah, basically we're not meant to go out for more than an hour a day. And you have to take a piece of paper or a attestation on your phone saying you're either going shopping or you have to look after someone that needs care, or just have a really good reason, basically. And you have to put the time that you go out. Obviously, I have, as a journalist, I'm still going into the office, so I have an extra special attestation, so I can go into Euronews. But that doesn't really apply to anyone else. You have an hour a day. Oh yes, and the other thing is only 1 kilometer. You're only allowed to go 1 kilometer, so you have to also from where you live.
Because I know that you're a very keen runner. You've done a whole bunch of different trail races. How are you dealing with that, with only being able to go a kilometre from home?
Well, I got a bunch of routes from the last lockdown, like a little circuits, because I'm live near in between two rivers, so I sort of cross the bridge and back and round. And also there's quite a few hills up to Cathedral and another little hill, so I just tend to do a couple of circuits up there just to try and get the kind of climbing that I don't get like when I'm in Chamonix. Obviously you've got thousands of meters of climbing, and you replicate that here very well, but that's it really. I probably do push the 1K boundary a little bit, to be honest, but not by much.
Yeah, well, hopefully no one from the prefecture is listening to this podcast.
I'd rather.
And so, France, UK are in lockdown. There has been some skiing. Cervinia opened. I don't know, Ed, did you see those photos? Cervinia was open for a couple of days, I think. Did you see the photos that led to its quick closure?
Yeah, the lift queue lines and stuff. I think I saw those. Those pictures you're talking about. Yeah,
exactly.
Everybody jumped as soon as that opened. Green light was bound to happen. It was bound to happen.
When you think about it, there have been other resorts that have been open for quite some time. Zermatt, Saas-Fee, Austrian glaciers. They perhaps should have anticipated that the general public might turn up in big numbers, because my understanding is that it looks really bad, but there's this huge snake. I'll post a copy of the photo in the show notes. This huge snake of people queuing up, but I think they're queuing up at the beginning of the day to collect their lift passes and to buy a lift pass.
So it wasn't even for the actual lift?
No, it's because they, instead of doing perhaps what they should have done and asking everybody to buy their lift passes in advance. Is that how you understand it, Katy?
Yeah, I mean, from what I gathered, people were being encouraged to buy everything online. This didn't happen. But people leave it till last minute, don't they?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, it wouldn't have been many days longer before the tide had changed. But there are still places that you can go skiing now. Verbier actually opened last weekend for skiing. And we've got a snow report coming up from Andermatt. Charlie Rees, who reported for us from Engelberg the other week, has been out to Andermatt. But here's a question. So we're in lockdown now. In December, the lockdown is meant to end. What do you think, Katy? Do you think French resorts are going to open in December as planned? That the first potential weekend is the 4th, 5th of December, I think.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I was thinking about this because obviously I've already put it in my diary. But from the last lockdown, it wasn't just suddenly that everything was open again. We could only travel 100 kilometers outside our home. So that's great for anyone that lives 100 kilometers near a ski resort. But I really think they're only going to get local people, and that's it. I can't imagine that the Macron's going to suddenly go, right, yeah, all back to normal. You can travel across the whole country. It's surely going to be more gradual than that.
Yeah, no sense of optimism there. What do you think, Ed? Do you think a month is enough time to get on top of this to the level where resorts could open?
I kind of think they're going to have something in place, because my understanding is the money that it's worth to the economy, the French economy. Obviously, we're just taking France as an example. The money to the French economy is huge, and then to turn that. I know that it's the health and all of this sort of stuff, and obviously there's bigger issues than just how you keep the economy going. But I do think that's going to be a big consideration when it comes to shutting the whole of the French Alps, whether they can afford to do it, or whether, like we've seen back here and in the news a lot, is how do we learn to live with it? And I think if they just shut the resorts, it's a really, really big call. Thankfully,
I think in general, most of the people who have appeared on the Ski Podcast, we're all in the travel industry. We like to go from country to country. And I think we tend to be fairly outward looking and looking for the opportunities to be able to do things like this. You talk about the damage to the economy. The damage to the economy is immense across the board. So whether or not that will make any difference is another matter. Another question we've covered in previous podcasts is the British Global Travel Task Force. theoretically they're meant to be reporting in early November, and their principal remit is to decide whether or not they can come up with a way of testing to allow travel. Because currently, if we were allowed to travel, you'd have a 14-day quarantine on your return to the UK. And the idea is that you can have a test probably just after you get back to the UK, and that could reduce quarantine to 7 days. However, it's also been suggested that you can have a test before you leave the country. So let's say you were skiing in France, have a test before you leave France, and then a test on return to the UK, and cut that quarantine down to maybe 3 days or something like that. And that would be tremendous. Katy, I noticed on Twitter you shared an article this morning talking about I think it was the Savoie buying a very large number of testing kits.
Yeah, it's mostly for people working in resorts, just so that people come to visit feel safer. But I mean, I can see this happening in all countries where they, have this going to have this issue. So it seems like the obvious thing to do, really.
Yeah, I think I saw an article somewhere saying someone had asked Val d'Isère whether or not it would be possible to get tests in resort, and they confirmed that they're looking at setting ways up so that you'd be able to get a test in resort, maybe simply for your own knowledge. If you were having any symptoms, you want to be able to do it. Got any thoughts on the quarantine side of things, Ed?
I think the rapid tests that they are now rolling out through sort of continental Europe are going to be game changers in terms of travel. I know from the ski racing side of it, the World Cup Tour, they have, before you turn up to each World Cup, you have to have had a negative test within, I think it's the last 24, could be 48, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. But you have to have a clear test before you're allowed to come up and into the World Cup bubble, if you like. And they're setting up tests or places to get tests that are going to be, they turn around those results in, I think it's like 20 minutes or something. So I think that becomes a game changer. I mean, it's just us back here that are waiting 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's hope that will happen. I constantly on the podcast, I seem to remain optimistic. Often it seems to be, despite the evidence that's in front of us, but I'm pretty sure we will get some skiing in. But when that skiing is going to start is another matter. But on a positive note, people have been skiing, and this is Charlie Rees. He sent us in this snow report from Andermatt, where he went last weekend.
Hi all, this is Charlie. Hope you're well. This week I bring you a short report from Andermatt in Switzerland. The resort opened for early season skiing on Saturday the 31st of October, with only the Gemstock side of the resort open, operating 3 lifts and about 10 kilometres of pisted skiing. The resort has had significant quantities of snow for October, with a base of about 180 centimetres at the top of the mountain, which is just shy of 3,000 metres above sea level. Regarding the coronavirus, there have been a few updates since the last report. On the 29th of October, the Swiss government announced further measures. These updates have limited private gatherings amongst friends and family to no more than 10 people, and also limited public gatherings that take place in public spaces to no more than 50 people. Additionally, the face mask rule has been tightened to be essential indoors in all settings and also in busy public spaces outdoors. So this now includes T-bars and chairlifts while skiing. Given the recent news from France, Italy and Austria, skiing feels on a bit of a knife edge at the minute, and it's a bit tenuous to say it might be continuing for the next few months. However, Andermatt has implemented a number of procedures to hopefully make skiing secure and safe for at least the near future. Firstly, the resort has a limit of 1,000 people per day on the mountain, and additionally you must book your cable car slot for the first lift up in the morning before arriving at the cable car station. 45 people are allowed in the cable car at any one time, and you receive a text message just before you're due to board telling you that you may join the queue. This also applies to the lift down, so it's worth bearing in mind if you have to leave at a specific time. And as far as I can see, slots were released up to a week in advance, so looking forward to the main season, it's probably going to be essential that you book early. However, several cantons in Switzerland have also started to tighten up their regulations beyond what the federal government has suggested. So it's probably a fairly safe bet to say that skiing is not going to be much of an option in the coming months. But I think later in the winter, when there's more snow and more options for uplifts so we can spread people out more evenly across the ski resorts, the model that Andermatt has shown really might provide the answer to at least getting some skiing in some relative normality this winter. But anyway, that's all from me. Hope you manage to stay fit and well during the next few weeks, and wishing you all the best from Switzerland.
Thanks to Charlie for that. Hopefully I'll get to go out to Switzerland myself during the course of the winter, but depending how things go, you might hear from Charlie again during the course of this winter. And Alex, who was on the podcast episode 61 last time round, he mentioned to us that he was going to go over to Tignes. He sent us this short snow report from Tignes.
Hi Iain, this is Alex from 150 Days of Winter with my snow report from Tignes on the 28th of October. After a week's delay, I finally made it to Tignes with a forecast of a 50-50 chance of sunshine. The good news was the snow on the glacier was the best I've ever seen. The bad news, I couldn't see anything as it was blowing a blizzard, so much so that the gondola was closed and only the lower slopes were open. Even the hardcore ski racers, the cross-country skiers and ski tourers didn't really make it past 1 o'clock before they all headed down the hill. For my first time back on skis since the tibial plateau fracture ended my season just before lockdown in March, I took things very carefully and thankfully finished with all my limbs intact. Despite the howling winds and zero visibility, I would highly recommend a visit if only Macron hadn't thrown a COVID lockdown spanner in the works. None of the early opening French ski resorts like Tignes or Val Thorens will now be open until the 1st of December. So until then, this is Alex from 150 Days of Winter for the Ski Podcast. Ciao.
And I'm not sure, Ed and Katie, if you had the chance to listen to that, but we did go to ski to Tignes. It was the last day, and it was a complete whiteout. He had really good snow, but you couldn't see anything at all. But at least he got some skiing in. Alex does live in Courchevel, and that leads us onto the World Cup, because Courchevel is due to host a ladies' World Cup race in December, as is Val d'Isère. But let's start off by saying I noticed that Lech were due to hold a race, and they've already deferred that. It was going to be going on next weekend, I think, and snow conditions mean that they're shifting that to later in November. Was that a surprise? It was very early on to schedule a race.
Well, we've had the opening World Cup of the season already, which was up in Solden in Austria, but that's up on the glacier. So they got that one away, I think, a couple of weeks ago, which is always the curtain raiser. This Lech Zers race has been a new addition to the calendar. It was supposed to be a parallel race, head-to-head men's and women's race on a week Friday, so the 13th and 14th. Yeah, they shifted it back a fortnight. I think it was probably a little optimistic to try and get it in that early. But yeah, it's just a bit warm on the ground. I was chatting to one of the Austrian team coaches yesterday on the podcast, and he was saying that it's just been a tiny bit warm, and I think it's due to be warm in Austria for the next week or so, and then and they're obviously hoping for some cooler conditions. But at the moment, it's still a little warm.
Okay, so that's the the initial events, and obviously with Val d'Isère, they announced yesterday, I think, that the Criterium de Premier Neige events, and they're going to have men's events and women's events over a couple of weekends, lots of racing going on. They're going to be behind closed doors, which made me laugh, because I'm kind of thinking, can you really do a World Cup race behind closed doors? Surely if you're standing on the mountain, you're actually going to be able to see it.
Yeah, so closed doors. I think that's one of those that they basically, all they're doing is they've planned to have no fans, so there's no stadium tickets available, there's no stadiums, there's no organized sort of sponsor events that they would normally have throughout the whole of the World Cup season. So basically what they're saying is, obviously if you're there and the World Cup's there, they can't stop you coming and standing by the side of it watching what's going on, but they're not actually sort of selling tickets like they would do. So it's going to be a slightly different feel to the season. We had the head of the Men's World Cup, and he said that they spent a lot of time trying to plan all this stuff in, and he said if we get through half of the season and all of a sudden there, stuff changes. Let's fingers crossed that it does. Then they can add fans in, but the whole of the winter they've planned to have without sort of these ticketed spectator.
Okay, so even before Val d'Isère had announced this was essentially the plan for World Cup racing this winter anyway.
Yeah, they made the call back in, when did I speak to him? Would have been mid-October, no, early October maybe. So that had been the plan from the outset. Fizz employed a COVID expert, and because they cancelled all the North America trips they were supposed to. Normally, the first races are, or some of the first races are over in Canada and then in America, and that got pulled. The pin got pulled on that, I think, in September, just because obviously that amount of travel was highly unlikely, and obviously it's turned out to be the absolute correct decision.
So, in relation to the athletes themselves, then are there restrictions on their ability to travel? Will all of the skiers be able to be at each race they want to?
So, how Fizz have done it, they're doing these tests before every single World Cup, and the calendar has changed from the normal calendar to the COVID calendar, and basically they've just tried to limit the amount of long distance travel that they're doing, and they're also trying to split, because in World Cup, I'm sure lots of listeners already know, but you have your tech events, which are more slalom and giant slalom, and then you have your speed events, which are Super G and downhill, and they tend to be skied by different athletes, not always, but tend to. And so they tried to keep those tours separate as well. So you're really limiting the amount of crossover you have between not only men's and women's, but tech and speed athletes. So they've tried to sort of make the calendar as separated as possible. But yeah, there's tests before every one. If you bring back a positive test, you're not allowed to race. And I think that goes for anyone within your direct coaching team. So if one of your coaches has it, I don't think you're allowed to travel until you've produced a clear test. So it's going to be quite tricky. And obviously the implications of that is, in January, as an example, I think there are 9 slaloms, which is pretty unheard of in terms of they've compacted stuff, obviously, because if they're in one resort, they're going to try and get a few more races off than normally where you just bounce from resort to resort. So they're obviously trying to limit the amount of travel. But if you have a positive test, that means then you can't race for, at the moment, I think it's 10 days or so, or you get another test in a few days' time after that until you produce this clear test. But it means that you could miss sort of 4 or 5 races, which that's half a slalom calendar if you're Dave riding.
Yeah, I mean that's a challenge in itself. What about training at the moment? How are athletes going about their training? I met Dave riding out in Saas-Fee in the summer, and I think he told me at the time he was planning to base himself there the whole time. I'm thinking Saas-Fee is probably still open, but what's the situation with Italian? I think Austrian resorts are closed, but maybe you can still train there if you're a racer.
Yeah, so I think most, again, sort of continental Europe are taking a similar stance to professional sports. So if you're a professional athlete, you are allowed to continue to train. But what's tricky with that is, because obviously there's no tourism, a lot of the resorts aren't open. So you've got athletes that are allowed to train, and the Brits are grouped in with that. And so they're allowed to be out skiing in Austria and the likes at the moment. But to find a resort that's open, that's got space that other ski teams aren't already at, has been really, really tricky. So yeah, they're allowed to ski at the moment, but there's nowhere open.
Right. Okay. And they're allowed to ski, so they'd have to use skidoos to get themselves back to the slope every time?
Yeah, so it depends. Luckily, in places like Austria, it's not sort of similar to France, and a lot of it isn't similar to France. We have these huge, great big infrastructures of ski lifts and connectivity and stuff like that. And Austria tends to have, a few more sort of single hill runs with a T-bar or a pommer or something like that, and a bit more isolated in terms of that. So in theory, it's easier. So some of those are open, but yeah, a lot of the time they're skiing up on skidoos and organising that themselves. But yeah, like I said, because there are not many places open, you're bottlenecking all these athletes into only a few little places. So that's another sort of hurdle.
Yeah, because when I went out to skied in Zermatt and Saas-Fee in July, really lucky to get that window in. And most of the people up there were very, very few recreational skiers. Most of the people up there were racers, maybe not necessarily professionals. A lot of the youth teams who were racing as well, but they all reserve a particular run, a particular piste on the mountain there, a lane. There you go. Thanks for the terminology. Particular lane on the mountain, and you've got to book those a long way in advance, haven't you?
Yeah. So I mean, some of the people that are based there in these resorts, if you're based in Saas-Fee and use it a lot, obviously you have a relationship with the piste chef, who because basically it's down to them, so that they can sort of dish out slots as you like. You go to these the coaches meetings, which if you're not in resort, obviously you tell them that you're coming, and the first day you want to do giant slalom as an example. And then at the end of the first day, you come up to the coaches meeting, where it's a sort of auction. I mean, not for money, but it's like a little auction in terms of you've got all the coaches standing around, you've got the piste chef in the middle of it, and he's shouting out who wants to do what, and you've got to try and make your voice heard in the middle of this melee, saying, yeah, I want to do giant slalom, and there's like 50 other people that are trying to get in front of you to get this lane.
Right.
But yeah, it's the glaciers normally are very full in the summers, because obviously there's limited space in Europe that you can ski all year round, and so places like Saas-Fee and Zermatt tend to be the best ones for summer skiing, and they are, you maybe get 3 meters across in terms of the space that you get. So if you can picture a sort of giant slalom course set that's going swinging from left to right, it's not like you get a 3 meter sort of wide part. Every single course has to follow the same angle, because you've got every single left turn is like 3 meters apart, then every single right turn is 3 meters apart. So you've got all of these different teams sort of snaking down next to each other. So it's they do cram you in normally, but obviously because we're not traveling, a lot of teams will go down, the Americans or the Brits or the Austrians will head down to South America or down to New Zealand or something like that. And in a normal summer, that's taking a lot of traffic away from the glaciers and stuff. But now, because obviously we're not doing these big travels, you've got every single person that would normally be, from a racer's perspective, down in South America or Argentina or whatever, and now fighting for a tiny patch of snow in the Swiss Alps.
Yeah, and the type of training that you can do must be limited as well, because I would guess there's a kind of periodization. When I saw Dave riding in July, he said he was specifically working on technique, because I mentioned that the lane he was in seemed very short. Now, presumably, as it gets nearer and nearer to the season, then you start to do longer descents that are closer to what you were doing racing.
Yeah, but also on the flip side of that is obviously up in Saas-Fee, as an example, again, you're at 3,500 meters, or 3,400 or whatever the top of it is, or 3,600. So the altitude side of that is obviously putting a lot of strain on you. You can only ski half a day, which is all you ever really do as a racer anyway, whether it's midwinter or the height of summer. So yeah, he'll like through the summer, you do the beginning part of the summer, you're very much making technical changes, because in the winter normally it's so thick and fast you don't really have time to train. It's just maintenance through the winter. So the summer is where you make the bulk of your changes. So for somebody like Dave, who was a slalom skier, it's not as much of a headache. But for the downhillers and the speed guys, again, that would normally have to be down in the southern hemisphere, because you get the length that you just don't get on the glaciers. It's a big adaptation for them leading into what is, we're less than 18 months out from the Olympic Games. These guys, and you can qualify for the Olympic Games from now, so you've kind of got a lot of pressure, added pressure on this season.
Yeah, for sure. So if we were to summarize then for this World Cup season, essentially it will go ahead. I mean, it's already started. There are going to be some changes in that it's behind closed doors. It's possible that athletes might have to drop out if they have a positive test, and they might miss some racing, and maybe some won't be able to travel. But it will go ahead, and I think there's a World Championships this winter as well in Cortina. That's in February time, is it?
Yeah, February. Yeah. So it's the season from an athlete's perspective is going to be very different. from a spectator's perspective, looking at the TV, it should be relatively similar and that's something that FIS have worked really hard on. The fact that, yes, we're making adaptations in the timetable and schedules, and the fact that we haven't got fans on the ground, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't look as, bells and whistles as normal. It's from a TV perspective, it will still be the same, apart from you just don't see grandstands of people in the finish area or medal ceremonies.
You mentioned bells and whistles. I've been watching football and cricket on TV, where they've got editors who are putting in the sound of the crowd. Do you think that there'll be an editor for the skiing where they insert the sound of cowbells in the background and the crowd cheering?
Yeah, you can't have Wengen without cowbells. I'm pretty sure that's illegal.
Right, well, we'll see about that one. Thanks for that, Ed. Really interesting insight there, and we'll soon find out, or we'll find out soon enough what's going to be going ahead. Now, we have discussed on the podcast before about ski touring several times, and a couple of listeners contacted me to see if they could find out a bit more. So I had a chat with Mark Seaton, who is a qualified guy based out in Chamonix, does work with Ski Weekend, and let's just have a listen to that. Hi there. Today I'm with Mark Seaton, who is a mountain guide in Chamonix. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Good.
You're good. Like us, I believe that currently you're in lockdown, but you are lucky enough to be in a wonderful place in Chamonix. How long have you lived out there, Mark?
I've lived out here nearly 30 years, working full-time as a guide, both summer and
right. Working as a guide the whole time during that. So is it? I'm trying to remember the initials. Is it UIAGM or something like that? That's the
correct. Yeah. GM mountain guide.
Right. Okay. And so you live out there, and during the course of the winter, one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you is we've seen in a lot of the conversations we've had recently that ski touring really looks like it is undoubtedly a growing trend. I saw some stats from Ellis Brigham the other day saying that equipment sales are going up. More and more people are interested in trying it. Resorts are putting in a lot of places. Have you personally noticed that? I know you're a guide, but do you see more interest in ski touring?
Yeah, it's been a huge increase in it, really. I think the ski industry has seemed to plateau in terms of gear sold, but within that niche, there's just been an explosion in ski touring equipment, really.
Yeah, I've seen that. Although Ellis Brigham mentioned it over in the States, where they sell a lot more equipment anyway. They release some figures every year from the SIA, and that shows, as you say, that ski touring equipment sells. And I think one of the reasons is, I've started doing a lot more ski touring over the last few seasons, and you learn very quickly that it actually helps to have quite good equipment when you're going uphill. The lighter the better. I don't actually own any myself, but when I go to the hire shop, I'm trying to make sure they don't fob me off or anything. It does help, doesn't it, to have good kit?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, like all these things, good kit is the foundation of it all, really. But also in Chamonix, they've started making piste specifically for going uphill.
Have they? Okay, right.
Which is quite incredible. Which mirrors the explosion of what we're talking about.
Yeah, whereabouts are those in Chamonix?
So there's one at Les Grands Monts, which has been cut out through the forest and its signpost, and that is purely for going up. And that's, but they're all over the place. Most resorts now will have an uphill ski touring piste. Yeah.
That's certainly the case. A number of those I've tried over the last few seasons. I've been in Courchevel, where they got one in 1650 and then 1300 up to 1850. I also did it in Aix-Trois-Domains in the Pyrenees. I'm hoping we'll see what happens this winter to go to Crans-Montana. In terms of Chamonix, I know that you work very closely with Ski Weekend. And they have clients going out to Chamonix for ski weekends who often are looking to go touring, and they would go out with you. But I think I'm right in saying that they wouldn't necessarily do that ski touring in Chamonix itself. You would maybe take them away from the crowd, so to speak, a little bit.
Yeah, well, Chamonix is very much a hub. You can be in so many different places so quickly. With a Mont Blanc tunnel, you can be through in Italy. And so it's really a question of picking where the best conditions are on the day and going to where those conditions are. It's very sort of ephemeral, really, the snow. It changes all the time. And being able to read where it's good and where you're going to get the best skiing does require local knowledge.
Well, having lived there for 30 years, I'm pretty sure you've got that. I think, we were saying, within 30 minutes, there's a lot of different areas, other resorts effectively you can access. Because one of the things that people are looking for when they go ski touring is being able to find that untracked snow. And I think Chamonix can be quite difficult in the main areas to find that, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a lot of it is about going to the type of resorts that you'd never actually hear of. The sort of resorts, you phone them up in the morning and you say, what time are you opening? And they say, well, what time can you be there? You can have these resorts to yourself. And that is where you're going to find the best snow.
Right. Yeah. Well, that is the inside information. I do recall a couple of years ago, I was in La Grave, and we were looking to do some good off-piste skiing in La Grave, and the snow just wasn't good enough. And the guide took us. I think we drove about 10 minutes or something around the corner to this resort that had 2 lifts, and went up, one of the lifts, and then just walked and skied after that. It was just brilliant.
Yeah, that's absolutely what it's about, really.
Yeah, I think another reason ski touring may be even more popular this season is because people are looking to have some social distancing, and that's almost guaranteed with ski touring. Typically, you might take a lift up to your starting point, but I think this year, if people are trying to avoid that, are there other ways of still being able to go ski touring without ending up in a gondola with people?
Yeah, you can just take the car to the roadhead, and if you drive up quite high, some of the roads, some of the cols will go up to sort of 1,800 meters. I mean, the classic being the Grand Saint Bernard, and skinning up to the Grand Saint Bernard Monastery, which is famous for its dogs, which everybody's heard of, and that means you can go by car, get out of the car, and set up the hill without having to deal with anybody else at all.
Yeah, well, I think social distancing can be guaranteed, but one of the advantages, as you say, if you can get really close and know the right places to go. Possibly another reason I think that ski touring could be more popular this winter, and this might be my own interpretation of it, but we're both in lockdown at the moment. And I think that in lockdown, people have learned to appreciate nature much more than previously. And when you're ski touring, one of the things I really love about it is you're often skinning through a forest, it's quiet, you might see some deer or something. Do you think that connection to nature is a factor?
Definitely. And I also think that if you can actually go on a ski tour and see virtually nobody all day, you come back feeling as if you've had a result. That idea of doing it on your own and being a pioneer is something that is very attractive.
It is, yeah, for sure. And yeah, that's one of the reasons that probably it's more and more popular. So from Chamonix itself, if someone was going with Ski Weekend out there for a short trip, what kind of, I know we're saying you're not necessarily going to specific resorts, and I know you definitely don't want to reveal your secret spots, but how far might people be, driving before they, start getting onto the mountain?
Half an hour, 40 minutes.
Yeah, half an hour, 40 minutes. And there's lots of spots within that. Sometimes through the tunnel, would you be going to Italy?
The thing about Chamonix is that it's often affected by this wind called the föhn.
Yes.
is if you see the firn on the forecast, you know that you're going to have a horrible time skiing in Chamonix, because it just wrecks the snow, because it's a warm wind that acts like a giant hairdryer, and it just sort of evaporates all the snow, and you get grey skies. But if you go through the Mont Blanc tunnel, you get a completely different weather system and dramatically different temperatures. And often you can have the föhn blowing in Chamonix. You go through the tunnel and it is snowing like mad, and it's 20 degrees colder.
Right. Okay. That's
Absolutely.
all part of the local knowledge and being aware of those sort of things, and being aware of where you can track. Well, I hope that, as we all do, this winter does go ahead at some point. You know, I keep remaining optimistic about these things. So we'll see what happens over the next month. We're recording on the 2nd of November today. In an ideal world, everything will open up in December and we'll have a relatively new normal winter. And if we do, I hope to be able to come out to Chamonix to meet you in person, Mark. But otherwise, thank you very much for your time today.
Okay, thank you.
And Mark gave us a good insight into it there in the Chamonix area. You might be familiar with some of the routes he mentioned. He didn't go into too many details, Katy, because he didn't want to give away any of his secret stashes.
Give away the routes that people don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he was talking about getting away from the crowds within 30 minutes of Chamonix. I mean, you mentioned before that you were ski touring above Salonche, I think. You said.
And that's the first time I've done that, and I was just like, why have I not done this before? There's few people that come up from Geneva. Few people taking their dogs up the mountain, and just the snow was really nice. I was just like, it was just as epic as you'd imagine in Chamonix. It was crazy. Why have I not done that?
Yeah, and so did you drive up to the top point of the road and then tour from there?
Yeah, sort of walked in our boots for a little bit, and then that was it really. You get into sort of nice plain, open, flat bit, felt like a valley for a while, and then up. So it was really nice.
Yeah, well, I think one of the key points about touring is that, for this winter, you don't have to take any lifts, so you don't have to worry about being in a lift with other people, and you get a bit of social distancing guaranteed on the mountain. You can enjoy nature. Ed, I know you're used to going downhill very fast. Do you ever go uphill very slow or slow?
Very slow normally if I ever go uphill. I haven't done an awful lot. My sort of time on my touring equipment has been very, very limited, but the few times I have done it, I really enjoyed it. I really liked the fact that the mountains are picturesque and sort of, they're just so imposing, aren't they? And then to have nobody around you whilst sort of enjoying that is kind of, I don't know, it's awesome. It's an awesome feeling, and I always say I must do more. It's just what it's like with trying to fit stuff in your diary. It can be quite tricky.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's become part of every trip for me just now, ski touring side of things. Out of interest, I did contact Ellis Brigham and spoke to or got an email from, to be more accurate, Steve Wells, who's their hardware buyer. He wouldn't give me any numbers, but he did tell me that their ski touring equipment sales have gone up significantly over the last few years. So that trend is being backed up. I think if we look at sales of alpine skis, they've kind of plateaued or maybe even gone down slightly. In terms of ski touring equipment, it's definitely on the way up. So I am hoping to go ski touring myself in Scotland in January. And with that in mind, I managed to get in contact with the CEO of Snow Sports Scotland, Trafford Wilson, and we had a little chat earlier this week. I'm delighted to be joined today by Trafford Wilson, who's the CEO for Snow Sports Scotland. How are you, Trafford?
I'm very well, thank you.
Great. I take it you're in Scotland at the moment, are you?
Yep, I'm in Edinburgh.
In Edinburgh, excellent. So Scotland is definitely going to be of interest to a lot of British skiers this year. That's the general sense because of all the travel restrictions in relation to Europe. Is that something you're anticipating at Snow Sports Scotland?
Yes, it absolutely is, Ian. We've been in contact with a number of resorts over the last few months who have seen a real surge in terms of mountain biking trade in Scotland, and we believe it's because people are either not comfortable travelling at the moment due to COVID, or quite frankly, they're just not permitted to travel. So they're getting their fix in Scotland itself, and we're very hopeful that that translates into a stronger winter season.
Right. So already you're seeing, and through the summer months, I guess you saw an increase in the number of mountain bikers. And it seems to me perhaps inevitable that there will be an increase in skiers for this winter. Certainly, there's not a lot of positivity in relation to skiing in Europe. Currently, we're recording this on the 3rd of November, and we're about to start lockdown in England. And they already have lockdown in France and Austria. So we'll see about that. But with that in mind then, Trafford, if you're thinking about more people coming to the Scottish resorts this winter, can we expect to see any changes in resort in relation to how tickets are bought and operationally this winter?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a safety video that's going to be posted later this week, actually, and it talks about the key steps that mountain resorts have taken to prepare for the winter season ahead. So sort of the key things that are in that include paying contactless, booking online. There's been enhanced cleaning routines. There's encouragement around wearing masks or buffs in areas where you can't socially distance, etc. So that those precautions, I guess, are all in play. Snow sports has been happening or operating as early as July, and that's through our artificial slope network. So there's been some learnings that have been taken through artificial slopes around how they run their business, which we've, of course, encouraged our mountain resorts to consider as well. So look, I think in terms of the season ahead, we're up for it, we're ready, and we're hopeful the snow does what it needs to do, and we can see a lot of skiing happening in Scotland this coming season.
Yeah, certainly. We'll come to the snow later. That's interesting about the artificial slopes, because I think you'll be looking to encourage people to buy tickets in advance. And I think we saw, I don't know if you noticed last weekend when Cervinia in Italy opened, it might have been 2 weekends ago now. They didn't really anticipate how many people were going to come along, and they hadn't encouraged people to buy in advance, and they ended up with long ticket queues for the office. So buying tickets in advance would be a key factor in that, would it?
Yeah, of course. It helps, allow, I guess, the resorts to have the right level of staffing available. I think the big thing in terms of skiing in Scotland is we know that our weekends are usually busy, and that's where most of the trade comes for the resorts themselves. Midweek less so, and I think if there's interest in people coming midweek, hopefully booking in advance allows the staffing to be right and for people to hopefully get as much time in the snow as they possibly can. So sure, that content planning helps.
That makes sense. And what about capacity and potentially capping? I mean, I guess this would apply at weekends. In America, we've seen that some resorts will definitely be having some kind of a capacity. European resorts have not said anything about doing that. Do you have any views on that for the Scottish resorts?
Well, at the moment, the Scottish government have been imposed or proposed to impose, I guess, restrictions on how many people can go up to each of the mountains. Mountain resorts themselves are open in terms of taking in visitors, and I think it's something they'll just have to watch and learn from as the season plays through. Of course, like I mentioned, there's going to be your high peak times and weekends, so we'll need to watch that very closely. But equally, if there's midweek skiing, again, we'll just have to watch how people look to consume skiing in Scotland this year.
Yeah, and sorry, just to clarify there, are you saying that the government have already given some guidelines in terms of capacity? No,
they haven't. They haven't entered that space at all. So the mountain resorts will basically be looking to manage numbers themselves throughout the season.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you have a video coming out later this week that's going to outline some of the measures in place. What kind of measures can we expect to see in Scottish resorts this winter? It's more
your common sense stuff there. So mentioned earlier, paying contactless, where you're able to do that. Booking online, as we've covered off already. Enhanced cleaning. wearing face masks or bus where you can't socially distance. The other notion of if you live together, you can ride together, will sort of be encouraged as much as possible. So those are sort of the core things that Mountain Resorts are looking to consistently focus on, if you like, for the season ahead.
And might we see also temperature checks prior to taking a lift?
In some cases, yes. I know at Nevis Range, with their gondola system, they're going to be doing temperature checks when people jump on the gondolas, and they're also going to be doing temperature checks when you jump back off and on your way back down. So quite a thorough regime there. That's because they've got their closed environments. The rest of the mountain resorts, with the vernacular particularly out in terms of Cairngorm at the moment, I don't think you'll be seeing temperature checks on the uplift because it's an outdoor environment and the spacing measures that will be followed as well.
Yeah, so that's specific to Nevis Range. I think I had read that somewhere. So interesting. Would you another idea that I've come across really perhaps relates to what you can expect from a skiing holiday in Scotland, but that people plan a holiday overall in Scotland rather than a ski holiday per se, because if you're coming for perhaps a week, then there are lots of other things, and maybe you need to be prepared to include within your itinerary a visit to a distillery or some mountain biking or hiking or something like that. Is that something that you see for visitors who are looking to come for maybe a longer trip?
I'd encourage, if you're coming across and you're looking to ski in Scotland, the weather sometimes isn't your friend. However, there are 5 different resorts to choose from. And so if you can be flexible in terms of jumping in a car and driving a bit further sometimes to be in the right place where the conditions are right, that's definitely a good thing. And you're right, Ian, there's some amazing opportunities up in the Highlands. You can go to the distilleries, you can go on some beautiful walks. If you're into mountain biking, you can jump on that. There's some lovely locks to see, amazing castles. There's plenty to enjoy. Of course, not forgetting golf and all the things that come with that. So I think it's definitely a destination to travel to rather than sort of being one-dimensional skiing only.
Yeah, well, I'm right behind that. I mean, you mentioned the advantage of having a car to travel between resorts. One of the reasons that Scotland appeals to me is that I'm trying to reduce the amount of flying that I do. And in a trip that I'm trying to plan for January, what's really appealing about going skiing in Scotland to me is that I can travel up there by train. And I've been looking into the Caledonian Sleeper, which goes from London and will take you up to Inverness on the, the East Coast, or you can travel up, I think, on the West Coast as well, can't you? I think that to me is another real selling point, the fact that you can travel by train. Yeah,
absolutely. And once you're up here as well, you jump in a car and it's not a huge amount of driving to go from resort to resort either. So get up here. I think the train's a good option. You can have a kip on the way if you manage to travel through the night and hopefully wake up in the morning and be skiing.
Yeah, well, that's actually part of my plan. When I'm looking at leaving overnight from London, arriving kind of early in the morning. You can either get off at Inverness or go through to Aviemore, I think it is, and then after that, get out and do some exercise in the mountains, and the same kind of thing on the way back on that final day. Still be able to do some activity, and then hop on the train for the evening coming back. So if you can just guarantee the weather for us, Trafford, do you think that's something you could do?
Yeah, I think so. I'll do my very best.
Okay, well, let's hope for some really good snow. And I think it will be really interesting to check in with you again as we get nearer to the season to get updates on exactly what is going on. But thank you very much for your time today, Trafford. And we look forward to spending a bit of time skiing in Scotland this winter.
Thank you very much for having me on the show, Ian. Appreciate it.
Ed, I take it that you must have skied in Scotland during the course of your career.
I've skied a few times. Ben Nevis a couple of times, in Glen Sheaf more often, but it's something I'm really looking forward to this year. I think we might be forced into doing more skiing in Scotland than maybe people had planned, but it's going to be great for some people to experience something that is, not on their doorstep, because it would take me just as much time to get out to the Alps as it does to get up to the north of Scotland. But it'll get people excited about skiing on home turf, whether we are allowed to get out to the Alps or not, it's almost certainly not going to be as frequent as we would like. So, maybe we have to sneak in the odd long weekend up to Scotland. But the skiing up there, I mean, it can be very, very tricky with the weather. But when it's on point, Scottish skiing is insane. It was stunning. I've seen both sides of it. I've seen a torrential downpour, being stood on the mountainside in torrential rain, with it then shifting to snow and ice and being the coldest I've ever been on a set of skis, and that includes being in Canada in -40, to just this beautiful blue sky sunshine days that you could be in the middle of the Swiss Alps easily.
Yeah, I think one of the things Trafford was suggesting or pointing out is that the conditions can vary across the 5 different resorts there. So it really is a matter probably, and they're all quite close together. So basing yourself in one point and then being adjustable depending on the conditions. What about yourself, Katie? Have you ever skied in Scotland at all?
Never, no. Ironically, no.
Yeah, well, given that you live quite close to much bigger mountains, I suspect it's unlikely. But for a lot of British people, for this winter, it does look like, Scotland, will certainly be a place that you can rely upon getting to. Although even that's a bit unpredictable with Nicola Sturgeon, because she does come up with a separate rules for Scotland. But we'll see. Hopefully that will come together. Just wanted to mention Ski Book Group. Last episode in 61, I covered a whole life. I don't know if either of you have come across this particular book, but it's a great book about just set in an Austrian village in the early 19th century. And one of our listeners, Lucy Edwards, also read the book, and she sent in this review, which I'm just going to go through. So she talked about the main character, who's Egger. Egger accepts the harsh brutalities of life, as most men and women of his generation did, surviving childhood beatings, an avalanche that wipes out a village, a highly dangerous job building cable cars, and the Second World War. None of these events break him, however, and he moves on with his life each time. The advent of a new age of cable cars is nicely documented. Through the eyes of Egger, we see the changes to a mountain village's way of life. Egger notes that farm buildings that once housed animals now accommodate tourists. And I'll just chip in at this point that my mum and dad went skiing in St Anton when I was much younger. And I went out there a couple of years ago and interviewed, I wrote an article about it, but I met their host from the place they stayed, a place called House Falk in St Anton. And it turns out that Richard Falk, who was their ski instructor, was a part-time cowherd, so to speak, and a part-time ski instructor. And all the cows lived in the ground level of House Falk, this pension where they were staying. And the guests lived on the first floor. And effectively, it worked like central heating. All the cows in there during the winter kept the whole place nice and warm. So literally, what she's talking about in the book there, happened in real life. She also says, I'd have perhaps liked to heard his voice. Maybe in the short novella format, this dialogue wasn't possible. In any case, the charm of the book lies in its powerful descriptions, especially of the mountain landscape. It's a good read for anyone who loves Central Europe and the mountains in summer and winter. So I really appreciate that, Lucy. And if anyone else wants to send in their reviews, they're very welcome. And Ed and Katie, if you're looking for a good book, I can recommend A Whole Life. I'm also going to mention another book, which is called Fjord Mountain Mission. Now, listener, if you're a regular listener to the show and you listen to episode 47, you would know who Fjord is, because we had Caroline Elliott on the show, who works out in Artoust in the French Pyrenees, and Fjord was her search and rescue dog. And we had a whole discussion about avalanche dogs, etc. And she's putting together this children's snow safety book, and is currently crowdfunding, and she's getting quite close to it. So I'm going to put a link into the show notes. Oh, I see Chemi Alcott donated £20 9 days ago. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to help that book get on the go. It's called Fjord Mountain Mission. Otherwise, like to thank Mike Powell from Snowheads. He said another great listen for the last podcast. Andrew Brannan said he enjoyed the most recent podcast, finding the info very useful. And as far as the next episode of the podcast is concerned, my guess is we'll be talking about whether or not the season will go ahead. That will be in about 2 weeks' time, so we'll be getting closer. We'll probably be reporting on the World Cup, that Lech event, perhaps as that goes on, and we'll have some other interviews as well. So please, if you've enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe, share, and you can contact with us on social media at Twitter and Facebook. We are at the Ski Podcast. You can follow me at Skipedia. And I'd like to thank my guests for today, Ed Drake from the Ski Racing Podcast, and Katy Dartford from Euronews, should we say, Katy?
You can say that.
Freelance journalist. Watch out for her post. So thanks, Ed. Thanks, Katy, and thank you to Switzerland Tourism, and of course, thank you, listener, for listening to us today.